All right, folks. Hello, welcome. I can't.
Yeah, unless your camera's off.
Is everyone's camera on? Can everyone see each other and hear each other?
I can see everyone but Jennifer.
Jennifer, we need you.
How's that?
There she is.
Hi.
Jennifer.
All right.
Charlie.
Hi, Joel.
Good to see you. I was worried that the music would just play for the entire hour. I was like, oh no. All
That was
right.
great music
I feel
too, by
100
the way.
years old. I felt like a 100-year-old person and didn't know how to both talk and hear the music at the same time.
How's my background look? Can you guys see anything weird?
Yeah,
10 out of
you
10.
rent those books from that bookstore of all the liberal books you put in the back.
In big blocks, right?
Yeah.
10 out of 10 on Room Rater. I know Jeff Stein has gotten some pretty good Room Rater.
Rated.
Yeah.
Not that I don't want attention on this panel, but I hope Room Rater isn't watching because you are seeing my apartment as I came in about 10 minutes ago and haven't been here in weeks, and it's quite disheveled.
And I think you have to hop a plane pretty soon too, right, Amanda?
I do, which I found out about very recently. So
Such is the life of a national journalist. So what I'll do is I'll kick.
We thought it was gonna be different, right? 2021.
Absolutely. So
Okay,
because
we're
of
live,
that,
Katrina, so.
I will kick things off. I will make it fast. I'm going to do my spiel and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Joel. Thank you for being here, everyone. Welcome to this panel, Reflections on the 2020 Election, hosted by Syracuse Press Club and Syracuse University. I'm Katrina Tulloch. I'm president of the Syracuse Press Club. I welcome you all. I welcome our fine panel. Thank you for joining us on a weeknight during a pandemic while the fabric of our democracy is coming undone. About this time last year, these three fine reporters traveled to Syracuse in person to discuss their expectations for the 2020 election. Jennifer Jacobs, senior White House correspondent for Bloomberg News, Amanda Golden, political embed reporter for NBC News and MSNBC, and Jeff Stein, White House economics reporter. And they had a fascinating conversation, but I don't think any of us could have expected or prepared us for what actually unfolded over the past 12 months. COVID-19 pandemic has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. The economy is completely broken. Truth decay and white supremacy have reared their ugly heads. And just this week, Republicans have lost all three levers of power in the House, the Senate, and the presidency, leading to insurrection and violence and chaos in the Capitol in Washington yesterday. I believe Jennifer Jacobs was actually there. So I'll say quickly, a particularly chilling moment I saw on live TV was when the rioters stole media equipment and threw it in a pile in this deranged sort of anti-media bonfire. So the hatred for the media, the hatred for journalism, the hatred for truth is palpable and real and terrifying. So this club exists and panels like this exist not just to celebrate media during good times, but to defend it and to spread truth and defend free speech during bad times. And these are bad times. If you believe in that mission, for any of you here, I invite you to join the club or donate to the Syracuse Press Club. If you're a working journalist in Central New York, I hope you will submit your fine work from 2020 to our Press Club Awards at syracusepressclub.org. This club is 70 years old and we have no plans to stop our momentum, evident by tonight when we'll hear from these fine national journalists who had a front seat to the madness for the last 12 months. Once more, Jennifer Jacobs, Amanda Golden, and Jeff Stein. I will turn the floor over to our moderator, Joel Kaplan, who did such a marvelous job last year that we had to invite him back. Thank you, Jennifer, Amanda, Jeff. We're so excited to hear your insights on this historic, troubling time in American history.
Thanks so much, Katrina. I'm very excited too. It was just about a year ago that we all got together, and since then it's been a really uneventful year. So we can now kind of talk about what went on. I mean, the only advantage about what went on is I'm actually wearing pajama bottoms right now, as opposed to when I actually was there in person. But these three panelists from a year ago were incredible. And I remember it was shortly after the Iowa caucuses, we got together, right? And Joe Biden was dead man walking. I mean, he came in like 5th place. And then he went to New Hampshire and like left town before they even voted. And then a few things happened. And I'm so excited to be back with these three because I got to watch Jennifer Jacobs become Dr. COVID. She's breaking every time anyone in the White House hit COVID. It was Jennifer Jacobs with the story. I personally think that you tilted the election for Biden because of the Hope Hicks story. Because if not for you, we still wouldn't know that Trump had COVID. I think they would have kept him in the White House in secret. And then today, I get a news alert from the Washington Post and a Jeffrey Stein story. He's already breaking news about the new Commerce Secretary and the new Labor Secretary and how there's a battle brewing between labor and business. So that's cool. And Amanda, where are you going at 8 o'clock tonight? Or is it a big secret?
No, that's a good question. I was just in Wilmington, Delaware. I've been part of the team covering the transition. I'm in DC to literally get clothes and then heading to Florida for the RNC winter meeting tomorrow because suddenly it sounds a little more interesting.
Didn't they, no, is it true that they revoked their invitation to Mike Pence?
To the RNC winter meeting? That's a good
Yeah.
question. We'll find
I
out.
thought I heard that somewhere. I could be wrong, but
Jennifer might have more on that, actually. I defer to Jennifer.
I know that he's not going. And
Yeah, that was the
Trump-
latest we had too.
yeah. So let's just talk about, I mean, we have to talk about yesterday, right? I mean, it's the biggest moment since 1812. Like Katrina was saying, instead of burning books, which is probably what they did in 1812 when the British came, they're now burning cameras. So, some progress. But Jennifer, you were there. Amanda, you were in Delaware. Jeff, I don't know, were you in the White House? I mean, I'd like to hear from all three of you about what went on, what you saw, what you heard, and what it was like. Jennifer, why don't you start?
Did you say me?
Yeah. Yes, I said you.
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I was down at the Washington Monument listening to the president's speech from back there. I wanted to see what the crowd size actually was. It was thousands of people. It did stretch all the way back to the Washington Monument. You could barely hear the president. They did have speakers going and there was a reverb. And so when the president said, I hope you guys are all going to walk down to Congress and object to, this historically non-controversial process of certifying the Electoral College vote, I didn't think I heard him quite right. And then people in the crowd started buzzing saying, he just told us he's going to be coming down to Congress. We got to get down there. So floods of people started leaving the president's speech right in the middle of it and walking very slowly and calmly down towards the Capitol across the mall. And along the way, I shot video and snapped pictures of people, and I was just listening to people's conversations, and people were absolutely amped up to have the president come down there, and they felt very much ordered by him to go down there and cause trouble. So I overheard one group of men who all had backpacks strapped to their chests, and one had yellow tape strapping it around his body. Some of them were wearing what looked like flak jackets. And they were saying, are you guys ready to make history? They were really, really amped up. So they got down to the Capitol, and then the first crowds of people started just breaking over the barricades and moving in. So I didn't go into the Capitol, but just stood outside and watched things starting to unfold. And then the Capitol Police were obviously overwhelmed and were trying to get people out of there. And you guys saw the rest of the story.
So I assume you had your press pass on and all that. Were you at all hassled or anything by them?
I was hassled, and I did not have my press badge on. I tend to go running a lot, and I had run down there in just some athletic gear, and I had tucked my press badge into my pocket, because when you wear your press badge, you get even more hassle. So some of the Trump supporters who were wearing a lot of Trump gear, lots of MAGA hats and MAGA shirts and some, red, white, and blue, some of them approached me and surrounded me and just started yelling at me to take off my mask. And one was yelling, my 95-year-old grandma had COVID and she survived it, and started yelling epithets at me and everything. And actually another reporter, a cameraman who was down there covering the events independently, came over and almost was trying to come to my rescue. And I said, it's okay. We're used to this as reporters. And I just said, it's all right. So they were yelling at me to take my mask off. A few other people just, when they saw that I was wearing pink and not wearing Trump colors, people just were starting to question that and harassing me a little bit. I don't know, but for the most part, thousands of people were very peaceable. For the most part, there were people in wheelchairs, there were people walking dogs, Black people, white people, brown people, all sorts of people all together. And most were just really happy to hear the president speak. It was walking down with them on the mall in this big mass. It just seemed like it was just going to be a peaceful gathering down there. I don't think that I really no one expected that.
Great. So Amanda, I assume then, because what you just said, you were in Wilmington or you were in Delaware when all this happened. And I assume that means you're covering the president and vice president-elect. So tell us about your day yesterday.
Yeah, it honestly feels kind of like Earth 2, hearing what Jennifer just described as to what we were experiencing in Wilmington, because the president-elect was holding an event initially to talk about the economy. That was what it was billed as. And I was one of what we call an expanded pool of reporters that goes into the room. You're sitting, if you've seen the pictures, they have the reporters sitting in the white circles around, taking COVID as a very serious issue, lots of precautions in place. You have to get COVID tested in advance of going in. And so we were going in, and then as we were waiting for the president-elect to come over to the Queen Theater, where he tends to do a lot of these events in Wilmington, every reporter in the room, is watching the coverage of the Capitol on their phones, on their computers, and we're waiting longer and longer, close to an hour, I think it was, beyond when we were expected, for the president-elect to come in. And when he finally did, we got very little guidance and a quick heads up that we're no longer talking about the economy. He's going to address everything that's happening, which we all sort of figured was going to happen, but hadn't, heard anything official. And then given that guidance from the transition team, and he then came in, made that very strong statement. We tried to shout questions as he was leaving. He doubled back just to say that he wasn't concerned for his own safety or for that of his upcoming inauguration, which is now less than 2 weeks. And some of the events are taking place exactly where there were people protesting and climbing the steps of the Capitol yesterday. So it felt like an alternate reality in a lot of ways. And yes, he was trying to look presidential and address everything, but it was a complete parallel to what we were seeing going on back in DC. And, for so many of us, and I'm sure both Jennifer and Jeff can speak to this, it just felt, we've covered Trump rallies before. I was assigned to Vice President Mike Pence for the final months of the campaign trail, which we can talk about later. But, seeing those rallies and those events and how supporters are so enthusiastic and yes, animated, it still was shocking to see it get that violent and that graphic later in the day.
All right. And Jeff, where were you yesterday? Tell me, you were just in the Washington Post offices calling your sources to find out who the new Commerce Secretary is.
It was even less exciting than that. I was just at home with the TV on, watching everything like you guys were. I want to quickly correct something you said in the intro, Joel, which is that I was involved in the Commerce Labor Secretary stories today, but I'm pretty sure that Amanda beat me to both of those picks. I don't know if you beat a minute, but I think
that's a very kind shout out. We're all just chasing to confirm every single category if possible. But thank you.
As I was telling before the panel tonight, this is sort of like a down period for me. I mean, I cover the economy, and last, from August until December, the big story was the economic deterioration and the stimulus package. The niche I've carved out at the Post, trying to really understand the policy and the stakes and the consequences for millions of people. But ironically, it was like a reprieve for me yesterday from my normal responsibilities, because there was no news on the list that I could possibly think that would have been interesting to anyone. Yesterday, I was joking with Ken that I was worried that ADP and did not make the front page. But actually got a chance to work on some long-term stories, and so quite as interesting.
So you're breaking up a little. Is that just me or is that everybody?
He's breaking up.
Okay,
Yes.
good. So I want to ask.
Great.
Yeah. So I do, before I go back to Amanda, I want to ask Jennifer and Jeff, when was the last time you were in the White House press room? Jennifer.
I'm in there pretty frequently as part of the press pool. We're in there at least once a week. We try to limit how much we're there just because of the coronavirus, and we try to limit exposure. So, but yeah, Bloomberg is one of the wires. So one of our reporters is always there. We used to have multiple reporters there, usually at least 2 at a time. Now we're just down to 1 at a time, and we really spread out how often we're there, but we're there really frequently.
So I'm curious because obviously during most of the year, all eyes were on you, especially during the pandemic. I mean, it was like a daily show and his briefings and all that. But we really haven't seen much of the press room since the election, mainly because obviously other things are happening. So what's it like in there now as opposed to during the rest of the year?
Well, it is a little surreal. You know, we're all socially distanced in our seats. So there's very few people in there. So there's a lot more pressure to ask the right questions and ask the questions that the entire nation wants to hear the answers to. And we have to really push back if we don't get the answers from whoever is briefing. We have to be quick on our feet. And before there was less pressure because there were so many reporters in the room. So if I didn't shout the question with the news of the day, I knew somebody else would. But now there's, it's just down to like 13 or 15 of us in there. So that's the main difference. And you're right, it's just so infrequent. Trump has really been a president who's been extremely available. We just knew that at any moment he could tweet something that would change the news cycle, or we would be able to talk to him at an event or a departure. We always had a chance every single day, sometimes many times a day, to ask him questions. And so it's been very unusual to just have the briefing room hollowed out, and we all try to stay out of that briefing room. Even the Bloomberg people, we stay down in our booth down in the basement, which is an office with a glass door that we slide shut. And most of the other TV reporters stay outside on Pebble Beach. So we all try to just stay away from each other. So there's a lot less of the, collegiality and fun that we usually have. It's a little dismal, but still a privilege to be there.
And, Jeff, I saw you a few times in there too. So I assumed you kind of would go regularly just because of the economics and Mnuchin or whatever. But when was the last time you were there?
I haven't been in the briefing room since the summer. I got lucky basically that, the other White House reporters were gone a few days and I managed to sneak in. But my strategy has tended to be more to try to work K Street sources, work people that the White House is talking to, and meet people sort of outside the briefing room. But obviously, like, the work that the reporters in there are doing is absolutely essential, and the FaceTime that people like Jeff get is amazing as a reporter.
And is Mnuchin on your beat since you're doing so much with economics, or no?
Yeah, I speak to Treasury people pretty frequently. That's a big part of my portfolio. Just to tell a quick story, Mnuchin had a sort of a Christmas holiday sort of celebration for reporters, and they tried making it a very sort of chummy affair to try to get people to write positive stories about Mnuchin on his way out the door. And I'm glad that me and a couple other reporters were very unwilling, right? Especially because this holiday party was right around the time of the economy falling apart and Mnuchin proposing unemployment benefits in the middle of the pandemic. It's one of those things where I think people want to, they try to connect with you on a human level when they think it will benefit them. I guess reporters do that too. But he's such an interesting figure in all of this because he's kind of been a responsible actor, being willing to work with Democrats and compromise and reach middle ground, but is completely undercut and unable to do anything about Trump's erraticism, Trump's inability to focus on the task at hand, and Trump's willingness, as we saw in the end of December, to implode, months and months of delicate negotiations because he was looking for a good campaign line for 2024.
Yeah. So it's mean for me to ever ask working reporters predictions, but I'm going to ask you anyways. Do you think that Mnuchin, given everything going on, would be one of the cabinet members who would invoke the 25th Amendment? and you're freezing, and so I'm not going to get the answer.
I don't think.
You don't think so?
No,
Jen, I don't know what you think. A lot of that talk seems so premature, overeager, and kind of like a flashy in the chase. Doesn't seem that. Your sourcing would be much better than mine, but it doesn't feel that real to me.
yeah, I talked to some members of the cabinet today, and I can tell you there are discussions happening. There are some cabinet members who would really like to resign. Elaine Chao did resign today. She did a conference call with her political staff today and filled them in, and then she tweeted that she was so disturbed by the violence that she saw that she felt that she couldn't stay on any longer. She's not the only cabinet member that wants to leave. There's a lot of pressure in the cabinet right now to stay on, and their thinking is it's not for their personal benefit to stay on, it's for the good of the country. Some of them really, really want to go. Now, that's not all of them. Some of them are still very loyal to Trump and are very defensive of the president and don't think that he did anything wrong, that he actually incited the violence. He didn't tell them to be violent. He just said, I'm going to walk down there and, just
show
let's all hang
strength.
out. Yeah. So there are people in the White House who feel the same way, want to leave, want to resign, but for the stability of the nation, they believe that there's critical work left to be done. And in their phrasing, they said, listen, we've got a dozen days left. They're going to be long days, but that's not a long time. So we can stick through it, and it's for the good of the country. It's to prevent foreign actors from taking this opportunity to come mess with the United States. So they just really want to keep the nation stable and prepare for the Biden administration.
All right. So Amanda, I'm going to test your memory right now. Okay. So a year ago we were like hanging out and you're in bed, right? So tell us from the middle of January until now, who you've been with and where you've gone.
That's a good question. So yeah, to correct one thing you said before, last time we all were together was before the Iowa caucus. So before.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
From there, no. So I was, at the time when we all met, I was still based in New Hampshire and covering a little bit of everybody and the state's primary. After the primary, I was then assigned to Senator Amy Klobuchar's campaign. So I was embedded with her team for another 3 to 4 weeks, as far as she went beyond that little bump she got from the New Hampshire primary. Then it was sort of this coalescing of the Democratic field around Joe Biden. We were, I remember that day, we were literally started the day in Salt Lake City, which we had flown to overnight. And then suddenly the plane rerouted and we were going to Texas, and she was going to endorse Biden and suspend her campaign. And that was a whole thing. She then continued to campaign for him. She was the first former Democratic candidate to really come out, endorse, and campaign. So I continued to cover her for a little bit, and then was sort of going between Biden and Bernie world, because we were waiting to see when Senator Sanders was going to suspend his campaign. But that was also right when COVID was hitting. So I was literally in Burlington, Vermont, staying at a hotel that was shuttering its doors as we were waiting to see if Bernie was going to do anything, make any kind of announcement or hold any kind of event. And it was with a couple other reporters there, and the hotel is slowly closing down. And then a lot of us were grounded, basically. A number of the campaign reporters went where they could. I had been subletting my apartment to a good friend of mine who's also a White House reporter. So I didn't go back to DC. I ended up crashing with my boyfriend who's in law school and staying in his student housing. And then we were covering events online for the next few weeks. It was watching all of those live streams that Biden would do, and Senator Sanders held a number of them as well. Once he ultimately did drop out of the race and endorse Biden, then it sort of became this weird holding moment where we were covering the nominee, the Democratic nominee, ahead of the DNC, ahead of, when he was formally going to accept the nomination. And COVID was ravaging the country and just really starting to take steam. So a number of the political reporters, myself included, got thrown into COVID coverage. We were encouraged, pitch stories, see the intersection of politics and COVID, which is everywhere, especially how it impacts small businesses, things of that nature. Just start going out, and was doing a lot of different reporting for MSNBC, for our streaming service, for .com, all the different stuff that NBC is able to provide. And then that led into the summer, where we're still keeping tabs on politics, but then all of the protest movements around social injustice and racial injustice started bubbling up. So I was literally trained over Zoom for what we call our hazard training of like how to make a tourniquet, what to do in a crowd, how to protect yourself, like Jennifer was saying, of where you put your press badge and all of those things to go out and cover protests. Covered a number of different protests that all remained incredibly peaceful when I was out there. And then was brought back in as the political stuff ramped up around the conventions, covered the start of the RNC down in Charlotte, was helping with virtual coverage of the DNC. And then this process called Veep Stakes, where, you know, we're doing reporting out who Biden's going to pick as his running mate. It includes literally sitting in a car in front of potential picks' houses. It was, you know, the lowest level of embed work where you're literally just in a car for weeks at a time, but making calls and doing your work.
So who did you get?
I can talk about it now. I was assigned, it was a larger list, and it went down when I was ultimately doing the stakeouts. I was in front of Susan Rice's house, Ambassador Susan Rice, who ended up being sort of like the runner-up pick to Kamala Harris. And then after that, I ended up getting assigned to Vice President Mike Pence, because at that time he was campaigning pretty aggressively, and it only ramped up, where he was doing multiple states a day by the end on behalf of President Trump and for his own reelection. So I got a taste of Jennifer's world of, you know, flying on Air Force Two and covering all of these Trump rallies and events, both Pence events and Trump rallies as well. And that was fascinating leading up to election night, when I was sent to Wilmington for election night number 1. And that turned into election nights 5. And then from there continued to cover the Biden team. And I'm part of our team covering the transition right now.
So quick question. Were you there for the vice presidential debate?
I was in Salt Lake City for that.
Were you in the?
I was in the room because for that I was alongside one of our White House correspondents, Jeff Bennett. I was helping to produce for him and also giving all the live updates and the color, what's going on in the room, to our network specials and everyone who's reporting back out.
Well, then the most important question is, did you notice the fly?
You know what? You couldn't see it from where we were stationed, but I also had a little return monitor, and suddenly we're like, wait, there's something there. Like, is that dirt? Like, what exactly? And obviously on stage, you know, it was pretty far away. I have a very hard time imagining that people in the audience could see it clearly. We certainly couldn't. We were pretty far back, but it was very apparent on TV.
All right. Well, we're supposed to be talking about politics, even though everything's politics, and it really is a crazy year. But I want, you know, you guys are as close to seeing things as anyone else. So the question I'm going to ask you right now is, and I'll start with you, Jennifer. What surprised you about election night, and I guess what happened that you were expecting, and then what surprised you?
Well, I was just pretty close to it. I was around on White House campus, and what surprised me was how excited some of the White House staff got when the initial returns were coming in. They really thought they had it in the bag, and they really believed it, even though we knew that it was going to look at first like perhaps Trump was winning, and then when those mail-in ballots were counted in the subsequent days, that Biden would probably take the lead. We knew that was going to be the structure. But Team Trump really got excited thinking that they had pulled it off. And they were very, very confident on election night. There was some celebrations in the White House, a little bit of drinking. People had some fun. They kind of spread out all over the place around the West Wing. And then they were just really crushed. I think that really surprised me, how devastated some of those White House staffers were that he lost. They really thought that he had pulled it off, even though I think the rest of the nation saw the writing on the wall that Biden was going to win.
Were you there at 2 a.m. when he came out and said, "We won"?
No, I was watching the live feed, so I was awake and writing, but no, I wasn't literally in the East Room when Mark Meadows convinced Trump to come down and say some words to that small audience of people.
So what didn't surprise you about that? About what went as you expected it to go on election night?
Well, I was expecting the race to be on a razor's edge. I really did think it was going to be close. So I think I didn't expect it to Biden to have won by as much as he actually did. I really thought it was going to be extremely, extremely close, but that Biden would win. But Biden really carried it strongly.
Yeah. Okay. Jeff, what about you?
I think I was shocked by races. I mean, I was skeptical about some of the claims that the Democrats had been making in terms of what they could pull off, but for months, people hit this, and she won by an absolutely tremendous margin. You know, I saw some of the polling experts sort of crowing last night that they got the results in Georgia right, and you know, maybe there's something to that, but they were devastatingly off in like 6 or 7 races, like embarrassingly wide misses. I know I'm having audio issues and apologize.
It's because you're a print
You
reporter.
know, the stakes for the country, there you go, through the Senate races were absolutely tremendous. And there was a sense of euphoria among Democrats election night that, you know, when things became clear that Biden was likely going to win. And without the Senate, there was going to be zero progress on stimulus, on the economic relief, on really any meaningful legislation whatsoever. And it felt like a crystallization of some of the mostly temperamental critiques that people have been making. Sort of, I mean, obviously there's a lot of policy substance to the White House changing hands, but people seemed in that moment, to me at least, to be missing the potential for another few years of gridlock at a very, very dangerous moment for the country economically and in terms of its healthcare system and all these other critical issues. And the fact that the myth yet again is, you know, pretty astounding to me and something.
All right, you're still breaking up a little bit, so let's go to Amanda and same question to you.
Reevaluation among, you know, newsrooms about what we're getting wrong.
Same question to you, Amanda, and also for everyone who's like listening in, please go ahead and put questions in the Q&A because we want to hear what you have. I mean, these three are willing and ready to answer anything you got for them. So
what surprised and what didn't? I mean, the points that have already been made. I think going off of what Jennifer said of you know, the White House team getting really excited, seeing those initial returns come in that showed, you know, President Trump was leading in the vote counts, things like that. It was the opposite reaction, obviously, being in Wilmington and, you know, talking to a number of campaign staff that were there, as well as texting others. They had real concerns, even though we knew that because of the way so much of the vote was coming in by mail or, you know, early, all of these other ways, that it would take a while to count everything and that the actual day of turnout for voting tended to skew more Republican. And so that would look in a lot of ways stronger for Trump. It was, you know, a really long 5 days to just be out there in the parking lot of the Chase Center in Wilmington, which is where everyone was sort of based, as we continued to see the results come in and waiting to call different states. And I think of the thing that didn't surprise me, or along the lines of what did surprise me, was the people's reaction, both, you know, of the staff there in Wilmington and also just across Twitter, and everyone's freaking out one way or the other. What didn't surprise me was the outcome. To Jennifer's point, it did look by the end that Biden was going to win. I also thought it was going to be much closer than it was. And it ended up, you know, for a number of days looking incredibly close. But when you saw the total popular vote come in, it was pretty overwhelming.
all right, so this is from Syracuse Post Standard reporter Jacob Pusey. And it goes, with your demanding and unpredictable schedule, how hard is it for you to have a life outside of work? Well, you get to stay with your boyfriend at law school, so it sounds like you had a good life. But
for a couple months there, it was nice to have a base and, you know, do the cohabitating thing. But my life is still very unpredictable, and I had to bail on plans tonight. You know, so it keeps changing for sure. It's hard
but you know, it's funny because, you know, the truth of the pandemic is I'm spending all day watching CNN, MSNBC, and occasionally when bad things happen, Fox, just to see how they react. But so I feel like all these are my friends, you and Caitlin Collins and all those people, but it looks to me like they don't have a life. So is this like something that you say, okay, I'm just going to do this for 4 or 5 years and then I can have a life?
I don't know if it's still directed to me.
Yeah.
It's a good question. I mean, it takes everything out of you. And they warned us ahead of covering a presidential campaign. It's going to be your whole world for 2 years. And, it's true, but you end up making great friendships and having these incredible experiences that are once in a lifetime. And you get wary of burnout. And I was starting to feel a little bit exhausted. I don't know that I hit quite burnout levels, but just before the election, it was pretty grueling, and you're traveling nonstop. And I'll let the others speak for themselves. It's still worth it to me. If it ever feels like it's not, then I have to reassess my priorities. But very lucky to have supportive boyfriend, supportive friends, people who seem to get it for the most part.
All right, Jennifer, I want to ask you the same question, but I'm also going to ask a question that my colleague Fiona Chu is asking, professor of television, radio, and film at the Newhouse School. She wanted to know if any of those Trump supporters yesterday had guns. Now, DC's not an open carry state, open carry area, so I'm curious about that too. Did you see many weapons out there?
No, I did not see any weapons. That doesn't mean that they might have had concealed carry, but no, I didn't see any. And no, you can't bring long guns into Washington, D.C. proper. So I saw no weapons. I just saw the people in flak jackets and carrying strange bags and looking very militant. So, they just raised suspicions to me, but I did not actually see any guns.
And answer the lifestyle question.
Yeah, I have no life. Yeah, so I asked my family, like, what have I been doing lately? And they'll say, well, you do a lot of gardening, which is true. That's my stress relief. On weekends, I go out and I do a little bit of gardening in my front yard. But no, I think like most White House reporters, we start working from the moment we wake up. I reach over and I grab my cell phone and I start answering text messages and reading the news of the day and calling people. And then we're working throughout the day, and I'm working most nights until midnight. The Iowa caucuses were actually a good prequel for the kind of schedule. So I would say like the last week before the Iowa caucuses and that amount of hecticness, that frenetic pace, and the national media attention and all the pressure and stress. That's what it's like every day covering the Trump White House.
But kind of like what I asked Amanda. So is this something that you say, okay, I'm gonna do this for so many years and then I'm gonna try something else, or is this like open-ended for you?
Well, I'm going to stay and cover Biden. And I'm really excited about that. I mean, to me, it doesn't matter who's in the Oval Office. I'm excited to be there and getting the answers that my readers want. But no, I can't imagine leaving. I love it.
So one of the follow-up questions there is that people congratulate you, including me, that you have great sources, obviously, not just COVID and other things as well in the White House. So how are you preparing now a new administration? Most of your sources are, going, although I assume some of them are permanent employees. But how do you go about with a brand new administration cultivating?
Yeah, I'd love to hear. Jeff, we kind of lost Jeff. I'd love to hear what he has to say, and definitely what Amanda has to say. It's really hard, and especially in COVID times when you can't get together and you can't really go for drinks or go to restaurants, especially in DC. So it's just really hard to have FaceTime with the new incoming officials and to get to know them. Yes, there will be some career staffers and folks still in the Trump administration who are still there. Those people stay on no matter what. The politicals will be gone. So it is going to be very difficult. And yeah, covering some of the COVID stories and breaking the news about the people in the White House who had the coronavirus it was 4 years of getting to know these people and earning trust and figuring out how to, get people to reveal something that was such, personal information. This was their health information. This is people revealing that their colleagues are sick. So you've got to find sources who are both inner circle enough that they would have visibility on some of these diagnosed cases, and then also being willing to be a source on something so personal. So that was really, really tricky, but it's just a matter of spending time with sources, being completely apolitical, avoiding all the snark and the political opinions, and just trying to be as neutral as possible and trying to build trust in that way, and never sharing any sort of opinion, even in like news analysis. So that was really effective in getting some of the scoops that I've gotten in the Trump administration. And it's just going to be a lot of that same hard work to get to know all the Biden people, but there's some great staffers coming in. I have gotten to know some of them, and they're a really good team.
And Jeff, I know you're still there, but you shut your video. Good. Same question to you. I mean, because the economics team obviously is going to be completely changed. How are you in this environment going to be able to cultivate and figure out and not rely on Amanda to break the story about who the Commerce and Labor secretaries are?
That was such a good joke. Why did it fall to silence?
I know. Can you hear me, Jeff? I see you now.
Yeah. I think we're finally maybe good.
All right.
Good. They are.
What question did I not hear answer? Was it about?
We were talking about the change of the administration and having to cultivate a new group of sources to tell you, especially when you have a new economics team and everything else, and you're in a period of COVID where the ability to schmooze and take some source out for a drink or whatever is obviously greatly limited.
I'm frankly at a point where almost every person I don't want to overstate it, but I have frustrated so many people who I used to talk to who refuse to call me back in this White House at this point over the last few months of crisis. And, obviously when you're a reporter, you have a choice a lot of times, like, am I going to write something that will prevent or lead this person not to call me back? And, every decision I think I've made to write those stories, I stand by them. But the reality is I don't fear departure of my sources because so many of them have become people who don't return my calls. It's the honest truth.
And just quickly, Amanda, traditionally in broadcasting the networks, it was whoever covered the candidate got the White House beat. Seems like it's changed a little bit because you've been all over the place. But will there be that changing of the guard, you think?
Yeah, I think you're going to start to see more of that in the next couple of weeks across, the 5 major networks, things like that, of sort of who's going to take the reins for coverage within the White House. But, speaking for myself, I'm at least continuing on to work as part of our White House unit and do some other stuff, at least for the next few months. And it's all just sort of in moving pieces, a lot just due to COVID and the economy, and they're trying to see budget and what's happening. That's just sort of the underbelly of DC and what's going on right now. But yeah, I mean, there are going to be people, incredible reporters that will stick around and adjust into this new administration and how to cover them. And, for the folks coming off the campaign trail, one of the advantages, at least personally speaking, of being out on the road so much is you meet so many people pre-COVID. And a number of the staffers that I got to know for the Biden team, even back in New Hampshire, are now heading into the White House. So there's a lot of continual contacts that will continue to go for Biden himself. He's been in public life, in government for over 40 years. There's also no shortage of people who know him and are friends with him. Some better than others, obviously, but there's a lot of people that are coming back into the fold for his White House that weren't out on the campaign trail at all, and might have been in the Obama years or in his actual office. And it's just a lot of continual recycling in that way. There's just a lot of other people that will continue to come into the mix.
And by the way, just
you
for
guys
now,
find the Biden people to be less fun?
oh, I'm sorry, Jeff. Go-
Say again.
The Biden people, they're so much more organized. And as
Compared to what? That's the question.
compared to the Trump people, the only other thing I know.
In a lot of ways, and Jennifer was in Wilmington for pool duty a few weeks ago. I mean, in a lot of ways there's organization, but some stuff is still very last minute and they're figuring it out too. And there's a lot of campaign folks that aren't necessarily part of transition and vice versa, or working on the inaugural. And so I was an example, and I won't name who obviously, but was talking to a transition official, but was unaware they were even part of the transition, because I thought they had been part of, just the inaugural team. And then I thought they got, loaned out to the DNC at one point. Like, everything is still moving around a lot. So I'm not going to have a clearer sense until January 20th. It
just feels like less leaky because there aren't as many random people going in and out. I don't know. That's just my.
They tend to. I mean, yeah. They. It's a tight-lipped or workflow as of now, but it's still ambiguous in a lot of ways, and we're trying to figure it out.
So I just want to toot the horn of Newhouse for one quick second that one of the members of the press team is Amanda Finney, Chief of Staff to the press secretary, Newhouse grad. So use that any way you'd like.
Joel, do you want to make an introduction for all of us? That sounds great.
I can try. She actually responds to me. I told her she only had one requirement. I gave Biden in Iowa the Newhouse scarf. And I told him that when I gave it to him that he had to wear it during their inauguration. So I told her that that's her only requirement from me. That's the only favor I'll ask her. So we'll see what happens. But what's interesting is you brought up, and everyone, you do have a new administration coming in, but you also have so many holdovers from the Obama administration that I wonder, are any of your news organizations kind of like looking at and bringing back people who were very prominent during those 8 years to say, okay, all these people, we need you to come back in and go back to do what you used to do. Jeff, we'll start with you. Washington Post.
I haven't heard that, but all of my editors covered the Obama White House. Like, they were in my position during that era, and now they've sort of like moved up the ladder. And I don't know how the dynamic will play out, where I know that a lot of the people I'll be asked to cover will be able to just call my editors. I just don't know what that dynamic is going to be like.
It means that your editors are going to know stuff before you do, and it's going to be very important.
The upside will be that they'll be able to introduce me to good people, and already have. But at least for now, they haven't told me that they're going to supplant me. Maybe if the internet connectivity issues I've been having continue, they'll have to do that.
All right, so my friend Lindsay, because there's a lot of great questions here, we should keep them all and make you guys answer. But Lindsay basically wants you to compare and contrast the incoming press secretary and comms director to the current press secretary and comms director. So Jennifer, I'll start with you on that one.
I think the current press secretary, our comms director left already. That was Elizabeth Farah. Our current Trump press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, is very, very protective of President Trump. And she pretty much has an audience of one in her answers. She's saying what she thinks he wants to hear. And sometimes she can be very combative with the media. And I know they think they have good reason for that. They believe that the media has been critical of the Trump administration and critical of Trump from the moment he came in. And so they have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. There's some bitterness there, and the media has been combative with them. And so she gives back what she gets. With Biden's press staff, like Amanda said, they can be pretty tight-lipped. They're a pretty tight-knit group. They're not leaking. They're keeping things. They're keeping their ship running smoothly. But they have those transition briefing calls that are really helpful. They've been answering questions. It does seem like they're willing to be helpful. But when we present questions to them about, hey, what do you think Biden's going to do on this particular issue or something, a lot of times they'll just say, we can't answer. The transition can't go there yet. We're going to have to wait until we're president before we weigh in on how we're going to handle some foreign policy thing or whatever. So we're just starting to get to know them.
All right. Let me ask all of you, and I know, Jeff, you're much more grounded deep in terms of economics, but there's a lot of questions about, because of what happened yesterday, are there, any good workings on, the breach? How safe do you feel, not just obviously yesterday, but just covering things now? We've been the, enemy of the people for a while, but when you have these big rallies, and I know even before the election, the Trump rallies, there was a lot of going on. So what do you do to stay safe? And even when the Black Lives Matter marches were also dangerous to journalists as well. So it's a different ball game for a journalist. And so back when, you just go anywhere you want and you didn't have to worry about anything. So I guess the question I'm going to ask all three of you, what are you doing to make sure you can cover everything and stay safe? And then what is your news organization doing about it? Jeff, why don't you start since you were in the middle of it yesterday?
Probably have the least interesting to say.
Jeff,
I've Jen and Amanda can speak to this even better than I can, but I find it difficult to interview Trump supporters in person when they, refuse to put their masks on, and you'll have an assignment that's, it requires you to talk to a certain number of Trump supporters, and they're not abiding by COVID protocols. And I've had that experience a few different times, and it's a difficult position to be in as a journalist, because you're making an inherently political statement by insisting on that. I mean, I don't think that should be a political statement, but to them it is. And you never want to meet a source, particularly, just a random person that you're trying to talk to, with something that could alienate them. So that's just one dynamic that, I mean, the Post is great about making sure we have all the proper equipment, but that's an issue that I don't know if anyone can really answer.
Yeah, when we're going to Trump rallies, remember the Tulsa rally, there was a lot of discussion about COVID safety and how reporters could really wear shields and even wear gloves or whatever, and double mask and things like that. And with the Black Lives Matter protests, I live in DC proper and pretty near Adams Morgan, and we had lots of people just walking the streets and peacefully protesting. And we did have people who were knocking over newspaper bins and signs and breaking glass and painting graffiti. There was a while there when the police helicopters were always tracking them from overhead with a spotlight on the cluster of protesters as they roamed around the city. And it created that vibrating hum, that reverberation, and it just caused a real sense of anxiety. And so that was every night. So every night I would go to bed with just my shoulders all tense, listening to the emergency helicopters flying overhead, and it kind of hurts your eardrums, if you know what I'm talking about. And so there's always a sense of anxiety, and you'd wake up in the morning and you'd go out for your morning run and you'd see some of the damage that was done to some of the monuments or to the streets or whatever. So, but I never felt a sense of danger. I know some of the more recognizable reporters do hire security, and their outlets will pay to escort them off of the White House campus or pick them up in black cars or whatever. And so there were some safety protocols in place there. I think the only night I felt really nervous was leaving the White House campus on the night of the GOP convention, the RNC, the speech that Trump gave on the South Lawn during the GOP convention, and a lot of protesters had surrounded the White House campus, and there was just no way to get off campus without going through these really large crowds. And there was a lot of police presence out there, but far more protesters. And I was wearing my press badge, and they were absolutely getting in reporters' faces, and they could see we were holding up our press badges, and they were yelling at us and spitting and really being threatening. So, and that was pretty frightening, but we just stayed in a little cluster and kind of hurried off and got to our cars and left, and it was fine. But it was very unnerving. So there were some moments, I would say, that were very tense, but never where I felt like it was gonna be life-threatening.
So Amanda, you said you were at Pence rallies, which I think are different than Trump rallies, but you were at some of the combined rallies. So how did you feel in terms of safety and all those other things?
Yeah, I never personally felt particularly uncomfortable at the rallies themselves. They do a pretty good job of having the press, within sort of a penned area. And if I want to talk to people, and I would, to Jeff's point, try to find Trump supporters that were wearing masks at some of these events just for my own personal safety, to be able to have conversation, whether we were taping the interviews for MOS, for, to have reaction to get their take on news of day or to how the election was going at large, would try to seek out those people that were wearing masks to talk to them. But separate from the Trump Pence rallies, when I was out covering a lot of the different COVID stories, there were obviously protocols put in place by NBC, which, to make sure that we had the right equipment, to make sure we had access to testing. And in certain scenarios, when covering a number of the protests, we would have security come with us. So if I'm doing live shots for MSNBC throughout the day, there was one time where I was, following a specific group of protesters as they were going to go through different areas of the district. And so I did have security with me, and it never got particularly contentious. There was a couple moments, especially as you get closer to the Black Lives Matter Plaza, that, you know, for a long time over the summer was such a gathering spot just for people to kind of come together and to obviously talk about everything that was going on, but it also sometimes would get contentious, or people would try to, you know, be aggravators and things like that, agitators, excuse me. And there was a couple moments where, you know, someone would come up and try to get in front of the camera or get really close to me, but I never felt outright, you know, in danger, and was lucky to have those resources around me.
So not surprising, a lot of the questions have to do with what's going on right now. And is the 25th Amendment going to be invoked? And are these cabinet members like Elaine Chao leaving because they don't want to get involved in all this? And what is the cabinet member, what's the cabinet worried about in terms of what he could possibly do over these next 12 days? So Jennifer, you're kind of in the middle there. I'll start with you. What's the dynamic? I mean, they are talking to each other about this, but do you think they'll just leave because that way they don't have to make a decision?
I would say Jen would know way better. The few people I talked to a couple people in the White House and a couple people outside of it about this sort of general issue, all on the economic side. They seem to think that this is not really going anywhere, but they might not know as much, as they're not at the cabinet level, so they might be totally unaware of what the real conversations are. So I defer to Jen entirely.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm glad she just sent me, you know, but the real concern out there is one extreme is that, well, the only thing he's going to really do in the next 2 weeks is that he's going to pardon all his friends, himself, his family members, every Republican member of Congress. I don't know what he's going to do, but to the point where people think, well, he's going to start a war with Iran and stay in, or what are these things? So what's the concern there, but also the 25th Amendment thing, if you could talk about that?
Well, what I know from my sources is that they have debated privately amongst themselves some of that calculus on the 25th Amendment. I do not think it's likely that they would. I do know that some senior Republican senators have talked to White House counsel and some top White House officials about the possibility of having a cabinet meeting, at least to discuss the 25th Amendment. I think there are some staff and cabinet members and Republicans in Congress who would really like to put some fear in Trump and make him understand the gravity of his words. And they do not want to repeat on January 20th of what happened at the US Capitol. So you probably saw Dan Scavino, the president's digital director, put out a statement early this morning saying there's going to be a peaceful transition. Well, as much as Dan Scavino says that, and he said it on behalf of the president, it was a statement from Donald Trump, but as much as they put out tweets, the president's supporters heard that dog whistle of come to my rescue. This election was stolen from me. They take that very seriously and feel it very deeply. And there's a lot of nervousness among the people around the president that we could see a repeat on January 20th. So I know there are security protocols in place. People are working to make statements. Kayleigh McEnany did do a press briefing this evening in which she condemned the violence at the Capitol. I don't think that aides cannot state that strongly enough, how upset they were. Mick Mulvaney, Trump's former chief of staff, today told Bloomberg how embarrassing and ashamed he is of what happened with the president inadvertently, supposedly inciting violence. I mean, they feel this so deeply. There's just such an urge for so many of these people to just get out and get away from Trump. They are so disappointed in him. They are so angry. I just cannot overstate that. But I just don't think that the cabinet's gonna do anything to try to remove him. There's just not enough days left. I think they're just gonna ride it out.
All right, so this is my last question because Amanda has to catch her flight. And the question is from Mike Connor, former executive editor of the Post-Standard. He said, obviously that Trump has not been a friend of the press, but that Obama wasn't really a friend of the press either, certainly in terms of confidential sources and things like that. All three of you, I want you say, how you think Biden his relationship with the press will be. And
Depends how much they're leaking to me, I think.
they're not going to leak to you, though. They're going to leak to your editor. Amanda?
It's a good question. I mean, the thing about Biden that I've observed in covering him both on the campaign trail and now at the transition is that he wants to talk. Every opportunity he can, he wants to engage. It's whether or not the events or the moment is set up to have him take questions. So that's why we try to shout questions if they're not going to, help facilitate that at some of these events where he's going to deliver remarks or introduce members of his cabinet or his White House team. He likes to talk. He likes to answer questions. It's just a matter of how this White House is going to structure that. And, already to their credit, we've seen from Jen Psaki, the incoming press secretary, hold these weekly transition briefings, and they do take questions from press, typically at least once a week, for us to be able to answer questions in that setting at least. But to see the kind of relationship that Biden himself will have with the press will be interesting, because he's obviously had relationships with a number of reporters, including ones at my organization, for decades. And so it'll be interesting to see how that moves forward, and if he, wants to engage with a larger press corps or stick to his favorites. And same goes for the entire team.
All right, I'll be Lawrence O'Donnell and give Jennifer Jacobs the last word.
Well, we try to shout questions to Biden when he's going in and out of the theater that he uses in Wilmington, Delaware as a staging place to do his public appearances. And it's really hard to get a question into him these days. He doesn't come and talk to us in a gaggle like Trump does. So far, he's setting a habit of not being as available to just answer questions in a gaggle. I do hope that changes. I think Team Biden wants to prevent the leaks, but it's already happening. So I think we'll be able to cover this White House very thoroughly.
All right. So I just want to say thank to all three of you, and that I love talking to all three of you. I learned so much, and the inside information. And I want to make sure, Katrina, that we book them right after the inauguration. I know that's soon, but I have a lot more to ask them. And so do your members of your Syracuse Press Club.
We ran out of time, as we always do, but thank you all so much for being here and making the time during your week. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Thank you to the 50 or so people for answering and bringing questions. So I'll just say goodbye until next time.
Thank you, guys. Great to
Thank you so much.
See you guys at
Safe travels.
Hey, thank you.